There is a promise that Jesus made on the night before he died that most people who know it by heart still have not fully received, not because they doubted it, because they did not realize what it requires on the outside in order to work on the inside. The promise is in John 14:27. "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give it to you as the world gives it. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid." Read the middle line again. I do not give it to you as the world gives it. Jesus is not comparing quantities of peace. He is comparing mechanisms. He is saying that the peace the world offers and the peace he offers work in completely different ways, and that as long as you are seeking his peace through the mechanisms the world uses to deliver its own, you will remain troubled even while you have access to the promise. The peace the world gives is conditional. It arrives when circumstances are aligned, when the diagnosis is favorable, when the grandson made the right decision, when the bank account is at the right number, when the news is not terrifying, when the family is well and relationships are stable and health is being managed, and when any one of those conditions changes, and in the world we live in, some of them are always changing, the peace the world gave goes with it. The peace of Jesus works differently, not because it ignores circumstances, but because it does not depend on them in order to exist. It has an internal origin, not an external one. It is, in Paul's words in Philippians 4:7, peace that surpasses all understanding, that cannot be explained by circumstances because it did not come from circumstances. But here is the problem that John documents with the precision of someone who was there. You can have the source installed, you can have received the dwelling that Jesus offers, and still lose access to its peace. Not because the source stopped, because the external noise became loud enough to cover the sound of the source bubbling up. And today's world specializes in producing that noise. There were no notifications on the night when Jesus made this promise. There was no 24-hour news cycle. There was no cell phone vibrating in a pocket, no family app on WhatsApp, no news feed engineered to capture and hold attention through urgency and outrage. There was no constant access to everything happening all over the world simultaneously, but there was something Jesus knew there would always be: the world trying to occupy the inner space with its own noise, with its own urgencies, with its own definitions of what deserves attention now. And John documents, with the precision of an eyewitness, the specific pattern Jesus practiced to protect the inner space. Not as a rule of spiritual discipline, as ecology, the set of conditions that allows the source to keep bubbling up instead of being choked out by noise. And that pattern is not turn off your phone. It is deeper than that, because the problem is not technological, it is jurisdictional. It is about who determines what has access to the inner space where the dwelling has been established. Further on, we are going to pray a prayer of jurisdiction, not asking God to remove the noise of the world, but establishing the law that determines what does and does not have access to the inner space, what can come in, what stays outside, and how the peace that surpasses understanding remains accessible, not because circumstances improved, but because the jurisdiction is correct. But first you need to understand what John saw, because John does not only document what Jesus taught about peace, he documents what Jesus did to keep it, and what Jesus did is more instructive than any verse he quoted. Stay with me. Because what John recorded about Jesus' pattern is the operating manual of the peace that the world cannot give and cannot take away. Open with me to John 14:27. But before we examine the verse, I need you to see the context. Because John is the only gospel writer who records this entire discourse, chapters 14, 15, 16, and 17 are unique to John. And they take place at a specific moment with specific pressure that changes the weight of every word. It is the upper room. It is the night of Gethsemane, hours before Jesus is arrested, and the disciples know, not completely, but enough, that something serious is coming. The tension is in the air. And it is in this moment, under this specific pressure, that Jesus makes the promise of John 14:27, not on a calm morning of a spiritual retreat, on the night of the greatest pressure in his entire ministry. And here is what John wants you to see. Jesus is not promising peace in a situation where peace would be easy. He is promising peace precisely in the situation where it would be most difficult. And he is promising that this peace has a different mechanism than the peace produced by circumstances, because the circumstances in that moment are objectively bad and will only get worse in the coming hours. The Greek word for peace here is eirene, not just the absence of conflict, but a state of wholeness, of inner alignment, of completeness. It is the word that translates the Hebrew shalom, not peace as a pause between wars, but peace as a positive state of total well-being. And Jesus says, I leave this with you, as an inheritance, as something that remains after I am gone. Now the line that changes everything. I do not give it to you as the world gives it. Hos ho kosmos didosin. As the world gives, as the system of the world delivers. And the system of the world delivers peace through the resolution of circumstances. You are afraid of the diagnosis. The world resolves it when the diagnosis is favorable. You are worried about your child. The world resolves it when the child makes the right decision. You are anxious about the future. The world resolves it when the future presents itself in a way you can manage. The peace of the world is delivered by circumstances and taken away by circumstances. It is dependent. It is reactive. And in a world where circumstances are in constant motion, especially in a world with constant notifications about circumstances all over the planet, it is structurally unstable. The peace of Jesus does not wait for circumstances. It exists independently of them, because its origin is internal, not external. Now I need to show you something that most readings of John miss, because it is distributed throughout the Gospel, instead of concentrated in a single verse. John documents a repeated pattern of Jesus throughout his entire ministry. And the pattern is this. In moments of maximum external demand, Jesus deliberately creates inner space. John 6:15. The crowd has just been fed with 5 loaves and 2 fish. The miracle was extraordinary. The crowd's response is immediate and intense. They want to make Jesus king by force. It is the moment of greatest popular pressure in his entire ministry up to that point. And John records, Jesus, knowing that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, withdrew again to the mountain by himself alone. By himself. Autos monos. Alone. At the moment of greatest demand, of greatest pressure, of greatest opportunity by the world's metrics, Jesus deliberately creates inner space. John 11. Lazarus has died. Martha and Mary are in mourning. The entire community is weeping. There is enormous emotional and human urgency all around, and John 11:6 records something that always unsettles readers. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. 2 days, no hurry, in the midst of objective urgency, because Jesus is not responding to external urgencies at the same pace the external urgencies demand. He operates at a different internal rhythm. John 17, the high priestly prayer, the longest recorded prayer of Jesus. It takes place on the most pressurized night of his entire ministry, and before going to Gethsemane, before facing betrayal, arrest, and trial, Jesus spends extended time deliberately creating inner space through prayer. The pattern is consistent throughout the whole Gospel of John. Jesus does not react to external noise at the pace the noise demands. He maintains jurisdiction over what has access to the inner space, and that jurisdiction is the mechanism by which the peace that surpasses understanding remains accessible even when circumstances are objectively difficult. There is a passage in John that no one quotes when talking about peace in a world of notifications, but that is the most precise of all for this specific theme. John 10:1-5. Jesus is teaching about the shepherd and the sheep. Most assuredly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs up some other way, that one is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he brings out his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. Yet they will by no means follow a stranger, but will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. Most readings of this passage focus on Jesus as the shepherd, but there is an operational detail here that is direct instruction about the problem we are examining. The sheep recognize the voice, not as a magical ability, but as the result of time spent in the shepherd's presence, enough for his voice to become familiar in a specific way. And when the voice of a stranger comes, and strangers do come with urgency and volume and insistence, the sheep do not stand there trying to evaluate whether they should follow. They flee, because the voice does not match the pattern they recognize. This is operational instruction about the problem of notifications. The problem is not that notifications arrive. The problem is when the stranger's voice, the urgency of the news cycle, the pressure of family WhatsApp, the outrage of the feed, becomes so present that it starts to sound like the shepherd's voice. When you can no longer distinguish which urgency is real and which is the rhythm of the world trying to occupy your inner space. And the solution is not to block all voices. It is to spend enough time in the shepherd's presence for his voice to be more familiar than the stranger's voices. This is what John documents Jesus doing repeatedly, not blocking the world, calibrating the inside so that the right voice is recognizable above the noise. Now go back to John 14. But one verse before the promise of peace. But the Helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things and will bring to your remembrance all things that I said to you. And immediately after, verse 27, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. The order is not accidental. John is documenting the mechanism. It is the Holy Spirit, dwelling inside, who keeps accessible the peace that Jesus left, not willpower. Not breathing techniques, not attention management by sheer effort. The indwelling one who keeps inner peace accessible regardless of outer noise. And here is the connection to what we examined in the previous video. The source that was installed through the dwelling, the Meno of John 15, is the same mechanism that keeps the peace of John 14:27. When the source is bubbling up, peace flows. When external noise covers the sound of the source, access to peace diminishes. Not because the source stopped, because the noise is louder. And the work of protecting peace is not to increase the source. It is to reduce the noise that has access to the inner space where the source is. There is a verse in John 16 that is often quoted for the first half and ignored for the second. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. The first part is radical honesty about circumstances. Thlipsin hexate, you will have tribulation. Not maybe, not if things go wrong. You will have it. It is a statement of reality. And Jesus does not promise to remove this reality. He promises something different. Good cheer. Tharsete. Take courage, be of good cheer, be confident. In the midst of real tribulation, not in the absence of it. And the reason is not abstract theology. It is a statement of operational fact. I have overcome the world. The victory has been won, and the result of that victory is active now. Peace does not come from improved circumstances. It comes from the one who overcame the system that produces circumstances. And inhabiting that victory, not just knowing it as doctrinal fact, but inhabiting it as reality, is the mechanism of the peace that the world cannot give, because it was not the world that produced it. I need to be specific about the mechanism by which the contemporary world compromises the peace that John documents Jesus offering, not as cultural criticism, as operational diagnosis. A notification is not just an interruption. Every time you grab your phone upon waking before any other movement, before prayer, before silence, before any deliberate inner act, you are handing over jurisdiction of your inner space to whatever the world decided is urgent at that moment. And the world has an active interest in being considered urgent. The algorithm that determines what appears first in your feed is not working for your peace. It is working for your attention. And it has learned with the precision of decades of data that urgency and outrage capture attention more effectively than well-being. So the cycle works like this. You wake up. The world immediately presents its urgencies, disturbing news, a message that needs a response, a situation that deserves your concern. The inner space, which during the night was relatively quiet, is immediately filled with the rhythm of the world. And the source that is installed begins to bubble up, but the noise of what just came in is louder than the sound of the source. And the whole day is lived in this state. Source present, but the sound of the source covered by the noise that entered in the first minutes. This is not a character flaw, it is architecture. The world has been architected to function this way, and Jesus, who did not architect this world but knew the principle behind it, systematically practiced the opposite, creating inner space before letting the outer world in. And John documents this pattern consistently throughout the entire Gospel. Abide in me and I in you. The abiding, the dwelling, is not a one-time event. It is an ongoing state of position, and ongoing position requires active cultivation. Not because the dwelling has to be renewed, it has been established, but because the position of access to it has to be maintained deliberately in a world that is constantly offering alternative positions. You can be indwelt by the source and still lose access to what the source produces, not because the connection was cut, but because attention was redistributed in such a way that external noise occupies the space the source should occupy. And the cultivation of practical everyday abiding is the set of practices that keeps attention oriented inward instead of being completely hijacked by what is coming from the outside. John documents this cultivation in the life of Jesus, and the prayer we are about to pray together is not about asking for peace. It is about establishing the law of jurisdiction, the set of conditions that protects the inner space where the peace of Jesus dwells, not to block the world, to determine when and how the world has access to your inner being, instead of letting the world determine that for you. Let me describe 2 Monday mornings. The first belongs to Arthur. 71 years old. Retired 2 years ago after a 36-year career as a lawyer. Married for 43 years. 4 adult children, 6 grandchildren. A man of solid faith, knows the Bible, prays regularly, is present in the congregation. Arthur wakes up at 6:15. Before getting out of bed, he reaches for the phone that stayed on the nightstand during the night. There are 11 notifications, 2 from news apps, headlines he reads immediately because they need only 10 seconds and already set the emotional tone of the day. 3 from the family WhatsApp group, messages from his daughter about a situation with his granddaughter that needs attention, a question from his son about Christmas that is still months away but is already creating logistical tension. 4 from news apps he does not even remember installing but that persist. 1 from the bank, a transaction alert that is routine but triggers a second of checking. 1 personal message from a friend with a link to an article about a political situation that you need to read. It is 6:17 in the morning. Arthur has spent 2 minutes in bed and already has in his inner space concern about his granddaughter, anticipatory tension about Christmas, political outrage calibrated by the article he has not yet read but already knows he will read, and the constant background of diffuse anxiety that news headlines produce regardless of the specific content. He goes downstairs, makes coffee, opens his Bible out of habit. He reads the devotional text of the day, closes it, prays briefly, "Lord, guide me today," and begins his day. The prayer took 3 minutes. The phone has already taken 8. And the inner space that the prayer tried to occupy was already partially filled by what entered in the first 2 minutes. Arthur does not perceive this as a problem. He prayed. He read the Bible. He did his devotions. And yet, around 10 in the morning, when his daughter calls to talk about the situation with his granddaughter, he responds with that diffuse tension he cannot quite name, that state of being present but not fully, of listening but with part of his attention already distributed across 11 different places. His wife notices. She says nothing. She has already learned not to. The second morning belongs to Laura, 67 years old. Retired 3 years ago after 30 years as a nurse, widowed for 2 years, 2 adult children in other cities. Laura has WhatsApp, has news, lives in the same world as Arthur. And she has something Arthur does not have, not because she was born with more discipline, but because she was confronted with a question that changed the sequence. The question came from an older sister in the congregation, a 78-year, Old woman with a quality of presence that Laura observed for months before asking its source. What goes into your head first in the morning? Laura thought before answering. And the honesty of the answer bothered her. The phone. The sister did not give an elaborate instruction. She said only, "Whoever determines what comes in first determines the tone of the whole day. If it's the world that comes in first, you spend the day responding to the world's rhythm. If it's him who comes in first, you spend the day responding to his rhythm. They are completely different rhythms." Laura did not implement a dramatic change. She made one small specific change. The phone stayed in the living room overnight, and the first 15 minutes of the morning, before any screen, were reserved for what she calls calibration. Silence, a brief reading, and the deliberate act of abiding in the dwelling that has been established before opening any door for the world to come in. 15 minutes, not an hour of mystical contemplation. 15 minutes of you first jurisdiction over what enters first. And the difference was not immediate. It was gradual. Laura began to notice, after weeks, that there was something different in the quality of how she arrived at the situations of the day. Not that the situations were better. The situation with her son was still complicated. The loneliness of widowhood was still heavy. The world was still producing the same urgencies. But there was something she began to call, without much sophisticated theological vocabulary, solid ground. The sense that, regardless of what arrived throughout the day, there was something inside that was not being moved at the same speed as the external things. That there was access to a stillness that did not depend on the world being still in order to exist. This is what John 14:27 describes, and Laura did not get there through technique. She got there through jurisdiction, the decision about who determines what comes into the inner space first. When the son calls with a crisis at 11 in the morning, Laura is present in a way Arthur cannot be. Not because Laura has fewer concerns, because Laura's inner space has solid ground that concern does not remove. And sons in crisis at 11 in the morning do not need a father or mother who knows all the answers. They need a steady presence that is not knocked over by the urgency of the crisis. Arthur knows John 14:27 by heart. Laura lives with access to it. The difference is not theological, it is jurisdictional. There is a form of postponement that is especially common in people who grew up without the internet and retired with it. And it is especially hard to confront because it disguises itself as connection and responsibility. It is called "I need to stay up to date." It is the posture Arthur developed, consciously or not, to justify the constant checking of news and messages. He has children, he has grandchildren, he has a large family, he has responsibilities. Being available, informed and connected seems obviously right for someone who spent decades being the available, informed, connected person. But "I need to stay up to date" applied without jurisdiction means the world has access to my inner space at any time it decides it has urgency, and the world will always decide it has urgency. And here is the law that John documents in Jesus' pattern. Availability without jurisdiction is not a virtue. It is a vulnerability disguised as virtue. Jesus was available, deeply, radically available, to the disciples, to the needy, to those who came with real urgencies. But John documents that he systematically practiced the act of creating inner space before returning to the outer world. And that inner space was not selfishness. It was the mechanism by which the quality of his availability was maintained. Arthur, available with an inner space filled with noise, offers surface, level availability. Laura, available with a cultivated inner space, offers real presence. And the difference between the two, which children and grandchildren feel but rarely can name, is precisely the difference Jesus describes in John 14:27. At this point, you may be thinking, but what if there is a real emergency during the night? I can't leave my phone in the living room. Real emergencies exist, and there are ways to maintain access to real emergencies without handing over jurisdiction of your inner space to the constant flow of non-emergencies that the phone delivers alongside them. But here is the diagnostic question. In the last 30 nights, how many times has there been a real emergency that required an immediate response that could not have waited until 6 in the morning? The honest answer for most people is rarely, if even once. The fear of missing real emergencies is often the argument that habit uses to preserve itself. Examine the actual evidence before accepting the argument. Or, I've already tried to be disciplined with the phone. It doesn't work. I go back to the old habits in a few days, correct? And here is why. You tried discipline as willpower. John is not describing willpower. He is describing jurisdiction, a decision of authority about who governs the inner space, not a daily struggle of willpower against habits. The practical difference is this. Discipline says, I'll try not to reach for the phone first. Jurisdiction says, the phone does not have access to my inner space before he has come in first, not because I am trying, because that is the law that governs this space. A decree of authority has a different durability than willpower, because the decree does not depend on how you feel on a specific morning in order to function. Or still, my life situation makes this genuinely difficult. I have real responsibilities that come through my phone, and I can't just ignore them. We are not talking about ignoring responsibilities. We are talking about the order in which things enter. And there is an enormous difference between checking responsibilities at 6:40, 5 after 15 minutes of deliberate inner space, and checking them at 6:15 before any inner space has been established. The responsibilities are the same. The response to them is different because the inside of the person responding is different. Laura did not ignore the son who calls with a crisis. She responded to the crisis from an inner space that had solid ground. And the quality of that response, which the son will remember, which will deposit something in him about what is possible to have in crisis, is directly a function of what Laura cultivated in the 15 minutes before opening any screen. Understand, your children and grandchildren are growing up in a world specialized in producing anxiety. The algorithm that runs their screens was designed with decades of refinement to capture and hold attention through urgency, outrage, and fear. And they do not have the historical frame of reference you have. They have not seen a world before the internet. They do not have decades of evidence that the world kept existing without constant monitoring. What they need, and what no screen can offer them, is to see in someone close to them that real peace is possible, not peace as the absence of problems, peace as an inner quality that persists in the midst of real problems. You can be that demonstration. Not by preaching about peace, by demonstrating access to it. When the grandchild in crisis at 11 in the morning calls, because crises at 11 in the morning are the rhythm of their lives, the difference between finding a grandfather whose inner space is filled with noise and finding a grandfather with inner solid ground will be palpable. Not easily articulated, but palpable. And what is palpable deposits something that what is merely articulated cannot deposit. Arthur can quote John 14:27 to his grandchild. Laura demonstrates John 14:27 to her grandchild. And demonstration is the only language that crises at 11 in the morning can hear. Before we pray, I need you to stand up. We are going to pray with the authority that the established dwelling confers. Ready? Then let's establish jurisdiction. Father, I come before you not to ask for peace, as if it were something that still needs to be obtained. I come to acknowledge peace as something Jesus has already left permanently, as an inheritance that does not expire. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. It was left, it is available. The problem is not the availability of peace, it is the jurisdiction over the inner space where it dwells. And today I establish that jurisdiction. Lord, I name what has been entering the inner space without jurisdiction, not as confession of sin, as honest diagnosis that paves the way for proper decree. For a long time I have let the world determine what comes first into the inner space. I handed over the first impressions of the morning to the news cycle. I handed over transition moments to the flow of messages. I handed over spaces of quiet, in the line, in the waiting, in the silence that could have been silence, to the noise that the phone offers to fill any emptiness. And the result was not connection. It was an inner space chronically filled with the rhythm of the world instead of the rhythm of the one who dwells within. I name this for what it is: absence of jurisdiction, not ill will, not lack of faith, absence of the law that determines who has access to the inner space and when. And today I establish that law. In the name of Jesus Christ, whose peace surpasses all understanding and does not operate by the same mechanism as the world's peace, I now decree, the inner space where you have made your home has established jurisdiction. The world, with its urgencies, its news cycles, its algorithms designed to capture attention, its messages that arrive with urgency labels that are often not urgent, the world does not have automatic access to this space. It has access when I deliberately allow it, at the time I deliberately determine, in the way I deliberately choose. This is not isolation, it is jurisdiction. I decree that the inner space belongs first to the dweller, and the dweller comes in before the world, not after the world, before. Lord, I now establish the law of the morning. What comes in first determines the tone of what follows. This is not some esoteric spiritual law, it is architecture of attention. And I decree that the law governing the morning is this: you come in first. Before any screen, before any notification, before any urgency the world has decided exists at 6 in the morning. 15 minutes. Not because 15 minutes is a magic number, but because 15 minutes of you first is more than enough to establish the solid ground on which the rest of the day will be built. I decree this not as a discipline goal I will try to meet, as a law of jurisdiction that is already established, because the dweller who has made his home within me has priority over any other access, and the world will have to wait until the inside is calibrated to recognize the shepherd's voice before the voices of strangers come in with their urgencies. Lord, I now decree the law of transition moments. The spaces between activities, the waiting, the line, the 1 minute of silence while the coffee heats, are not voids to be filled with noise. They are spaces to return to the dweller, to check position, to meno, to abide in the dwelling instead of letting attention migrate completely outward. I decree that these moments do not automatically belong to the phone. They belong first to the silence that allows the source to be heard. Not every single moment. Not with a rigidity that becomes a new form of anxiety. With the deliberate intention of someone who knows that the peace of John 14:27 is accessible in these spaces, and that accessing it in these spaces accumulates throughout the day in a way no single morning devotional session can replace. Lord, I now decree the law of response rhythm. The world will continue to produce urgencies. Messages will come with exclamation marks. News will arrive with words like urgent and breaking. Family will continue to have situations that truly deserve attention. I do not decree that I will ignore these urgencies. I decree that I will respond to them from the inner space you govern, not from the inner space that noise filled before you had access. The difference is not whether I respond, it is where I respond from. And the response that comes from a calibrated inner space is more helpful, more present, more genuine than a response that comes from an inner space processing 10 other urgencies simultaneously. I decree that real urgencies will receive real response, from an inner space with solid ground, not from an inner space moving along with the urgency. Now, Father, I receive the full promise of John 14:27. My peace I give to you. I do not give it to you as the world gives it, not through improved circumstances, not through a less chaotic world, not through fewer notifications, through inner dwelling that the world did not produce and therefore cannot remove. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. Mi tarasesto. Let the heart not be agitated, not be troubled, not be moved like water moved by the wind. Not because the wind stops, because the inside has solid ground that the wind does not remove. I receive this now, as an inheritance that was left, as operational reality, not as theological aspiration, and over every area where noise had been louder than the source. Over the news cycle that had created a constant background of anxiety, I decree that the law of jurisdiction is established. The cycle does not disappear, but it does not have unrestricted access to my inner space. Over the family pressure that arrived through the phone and immediately occupied the inside, I decree that I respond to it from an inner space with solid ground. And my family will receive better from me because what it receives is real presence, not presence divided among 10 other urgencies. Over the loneliness that sometimes became more evident in moments of silence, I decree that the silence of an indwelt inner space is different from the silence of an empty inner space. And the dweller who has made his home does not leave when the phone is off. He is especially present when external noise decreases enough to be heard. Father, I close with the scene John preserves of Jesus in the garden. John 6:15. At the moment of greatest popular demand, Jesus withdraws to the mountain, alone, not because he was an introvert, because the quality of what he gave to the world depended on what he received inside. And the inside does not renew itself automatically when the world has unrestricted access to it. You practiced in the body the law I am now decreeing, not as theoretical instruction, as operational demonstration of the mechanism by which the peace that surpasses understanding remains accessible even when circumstances are objectively difficult. And the same mechanism is available to me, not as a special ability of people with a contemplative temperament, as a law of jurisdiction that any indwelt person can establish and maintain. I establish this law now. The inside belongs first to the dweller. The world has access when I determine, in the way I determine, for the time I determine, and the peace that Jesus left, that the world did not give and therefore cannot take away, will remain accessible, not because circumstances improved, because the jurisdiction is correct. In the name of Jesus Christ, the same one who withdrew to the mountain at the moment of greatest demand, the same one who waited 2 days before going to Lazarus, not out of neglect, but out of an inner rhythm different from the rhythm of external urgencies, the same one who promised peace that does not operate by the same mechanism as the world's peace, the same one who prays in John 17, I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. Presence in the world with protection from what the world uses to occupy the inside. Amen. And now here is your mission for the next 24 hours. Tomorrow morning the phone stays where it is until you have done one thing first. 15 minutes of you first. Not necessarily elaborate prayer, not necessarily extended reading. The deliberate act of letting the dweller come in before the world. Silence or a brief reading, or simply the act of saying out loud before any screen, you first. One morning, tomorrow, to feel the difference. And if tomorrow morning is different, if there is something in the rhythm of the day that is different from today, you will have your evidence, and personal evidence is more persuasive than any argument. Now think of one person, one, not a list. Someone you know is living with an inner space chronically filled by the rhythm of the world, who wakes up with the phone, who goes to bed with the phone. Send them this video now. And now I need to prepare you for our next reflection. Today you establish jurisdiction over the inner space. The source is installed. The access law is decreed. The rhythm is being corrected. But there is a specific enemy of this rhythm that you need to know. Not the algorithm. Not the notifications. Something more internal than that. There is a condition that compromises the inner space not by what comes from outside, but by what accumulates inside. It is the kind of tiredness no one names as a spiritual vulnerability, but that Peter, writing with the authority of one who had been the open door, calls by its right name. And in the next video, we are going to open 1 Peter 5 and examine the law Peter learned in the most costly way possible. That it is not the believer's strength the enemy attacks. It is the crack that accumulated weariness creates where there once was solid foundation. The jurisdiction you establish today protects what comes from outside. Peter is going to show you how to protect what starts to give way on the inside. Turn on the notification bell now, because what Peter saw from inside his own fall is exactly what no one tells you about why weariness is not just human. It is spiritual, and it has specific treatment. You first, the world afterward. See you in the next video.